Hey everyone, I'm delighted today to be joined by Nada Al-Qutbi, EMEA Social Media Lead for IBM, and Ryan Bars, the Global Influence Marketing Lead, also at IBM, to talk about everything influence marketing and employee advocacy. So a very warm welcome to you both. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to chat to me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for
Thanks for
having
having
us.
us. Yeah.
Pleasure. And so just so that everyone can get to know you a bit better, it would be great if you could introduce yourself and maybe talk about how you got into influencer marketing employee advocacy. It doesn't just happen overnight, does it? There's obviously a bit of a backstory to that. So maybe Nada, you could go first
Yeah.
and tell us a bit about
Yeah,
yourself.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Nada, and I'm the EMEA social media leader at IBM. So just a bit on my background. So I have been at IBM 10 years, have worked in various different marketing roles, primarily digital and social media marketing. And I'd say I first got into influencer marketing and employee advocacy about 5 years ago when I started the social media role. And that's where I started to build our influencer marketing strategies, working with you, Analytica, on identifying influencers, and also working on our employee advocacy programs as well, where we spent a lot of time coaching IBMers on getting social, co-creating content with external influencers and kind of involving them into our events. So that's when I got into influencer marketing I'd say about 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think the timeline for me is kind of similar. So I joined IBM about 6 years ago and identified the need for people with social reach and influence to kind of come to our events, and we realized like we weren't doing enough with them post event. So we decided that we needed to get involved and create an official program and position. Here we are. Did we lose Tim?
I think he's disappeared.
Okay, well, Nada, it's so great talking with you.
Yeah, and we always say we could literally spend hours talking about influencer marketing on all our calls.
Do you remember your like kind of first influencer, like external influencer program or like thing you did, campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I remember. So I remember when when I was a digital strategist, I spent kind of 8 years in digital and social media marketing, and when I was a digital strategist, that's when I started running kind of social media campaigns. And I remember it was like an add-on on top of my digital role, and it was really difficult to kind of manage both. So I'm really glad that now we've kind of got the dedicated resource for social specifically, and that's when I moved on to becoming a social strategist. So I remember my first campaigns, and I remember like how overwhelming it was to try and identify influencers and to do it across like all our topics and across business units. So I think we've come a long way since like the first campaigns that we ran, where we really thought this isn't working and this is really challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry about that. An electrician came into our building, cut all of the power and the internet just at the worst time. So anyone listening live, hey Anita, that's never happened to me. This is a first, but I'm so sorry for that. So many apologies. I know that both of you will have smashed it while I was away, and I'll just have to imagine what you said. So both of you have introduced yourself and talked about the various different challenges. So apologies. Please continue if you were mid-sentence.
Yeah, I was just kind of asking Nada around kind of her first campaign and sort of that transition from thinking about digital to adding on sort of these layers of influencer marketing as, teams sort of are trying things out for the first time. And it's sort of like a stretch project or a thing you might be passionate about because it's, obviously trending. I was a little bit unique, and we kind of carved out this position for me as a IBM. I kind of had a different role in social kind of temporarily, and then with the intent of this being an employee advocacy and influencer position. Not that we have done it before. It was brand new, at least in the business unit that I was in. And so it sort of evolved over time. And that was about 5 or so years ago. And to Nada's point earlier, like trying to discover them, it's like living in spreadsheets and hashtags on Twitter or other platforms. And, obviously the evolution of being able to do that at scale has been really important. And, the partnership with Analytica has been great.
Thank you, and thank you so much for filling in while I was away. So, so one of the things that I find is fascinating. IBM is a very advanced brand. Anita, thank you for tuning in. Ericsson is very advanced at this as well. But there's a lot of brands that are starting out and not sure what to call this and how to define what an influencer is. Obviously, it's gaining so much attention, but also is ambiguous in nature. How do you refer to influencers, and how do you describe your programs internally?
That's a really good question, because a lot of times we talk internally, at least in the marketing organization, of like influencers, and a lot of times we're talking about people that are influencing the buying decision inside of a company. So can we talk to a developer that might be influencing a decision from like a CTO or CDO? And in the social team and a lot of like the internal road shows we have to go on, we have to make sure that we differentiate between like what we might refer to as an influencer inside a company versus what we want to work with someone that has thought leadership, has the ability to be authoritative on a topic, and has the reach on social and the engagement on social that we're looking for. So I think that's the differentiator from my point of view, is that social component. Who are they engaging with? Who's in their network? Who's in their audience? And making sure that those individuals that they're connecting with obviously make sense for a business point of view of the people that we want to reach, or that white space, those new individuals that we can kind of get into our campaigns or other activities we have going on at events or other things.
Yeah, I really like that, because the landscape has changed in terms of the different personas of influencers, and so I think you made some great points there. And Nada, do you feel like you take that sort of definition, but want to make sure you're not engaging with people that other teams are already managing? Like, how have you found that? I mean, you're across EMEA and 9 different markets, so I imagine that's a challenge for you to know who you're engaging with and who you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'd agree, Ryan. I think influencers are credible individuals. They're key opinion leaders and real subject matter experts that we want to engage with, build relationships with, that can help us co-create content, can help us position our brand and what we want to be known for. I think I think that the challenge with working with influencers kind of globally is that various different countries are probably working with similar influencers. We don't want to duplicate efforts there, and also I think influencers have a global audience as well. Anyway, I think the key difference I've seen across the different kind of markets in EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa, is the maturity level of some of those markets and countries with the programs that they're running. And I think some markets are just more mature than others. And I think that kind of affects the perception or impacts the perception internally, and also with the influencers that they work with and identify. So I think the maturity makes a difference there.
Yeah, and I think that's a fascinating point, because you've got the different markets, and Ryan, I know that there's lots of different business units that are running influence marketing within IBM. So you've got different levels of maturity. How do you kind of manage the program, paying so due diligence to that kind of maturity, and optimize the program whilst not trying to make it too competitive or compare different markets or different business units?
Yeah, from my point of view, marketing is coming together right now at IBM and having sort of a one approach in one direction. So we're attempting to break down some of the silos that we had within the business units. So you're right, Tim. Business unit over here could be well advanced and have a great program going on, and another business unit sort of trying to figure that out. But there might be overlap in some of these influencers and what they're talking about on social, where the cloud team might be interested in somebody, and also the data team might also be interested in that same individual. So platforms like Analytica can help us bring that together and kind of have that centralized view of what we know, who's working with whom, and what's their skill set, their topical authority. And then also internally, we have a lot of just, again, roadshows or conversations or Slack groups, just making sure that we all know who's working with whom and that we aren't duplicating efforts. We are talking with our communications counterparts and our analyst relations, because a lot of times, I think to your point earlier, Tim, with like the personas have evolved and they're continuing to evolve, and who we can consider an influencer. And those might be an analyst, it might be a journalist. And in the marketing team, we want to collaborate with the right counterparts in those teams, and communications or public relations, to make sure that we are all going forward with the same message, and the left hand, right hand know what's going on. So it's a challenge at a scale of IBM, but I think a lot of the working with vendors like yourself allows us to kind of understand what's going on in the markets like we're not as involved, and then also at the global scale where we're kind of working at the business unit level.
Yeah, I think it's obviously what both of you bring to your programs to achieve that scale, because it's because your programs have gone through different maturity stages. So it's great to see that there's a lot of alignment and communication going on across the teams, because I think back in like 5 or 6 years ago, I would speak to some of the influencers and they would say, oh, this brand, 2 people contacted me from this brand, and one person didn't have a clue I was working with that brand. It is a very different offering, and I didn't know what price to charge or whether it was organic, and that was pretty much what the norm was, I think 5 or 6 years ago. So I think you both of you have done obviously a great job at aligning, because it's such a difficult job to do when you've got hundreds of thousands of employees.
Yeah, and it's important, to align, because we don't want to be confusing when we go to the market. We don't want to, be confusing to the influencers working with. So I do think it's really important that I think that's the role of my role here at Global lead of this, is to bring it all together, figure out the impact influencers are making, make sure that we communicate that internally as best we can. And then the team around me is helping kind of do the execution of that, whether it's through an event or a campaign or other content collaboration, and working with Nada and her teams and others across the world to make sure that we're all sort of hitting the same goals and the same metrics, and we're all kind of marching towards the same end goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we spent a lot of time last year as well, kind of working on the Influence Council, where, we set the point of view and kind of strategy and around influencer marketing in IBM. And a lot of the kind of materials and resources are now available for all social practitioners and social strategists across IBM. And then we also earlier this year did built some playbooks as well, like step-by-step guides, and also ran quite a few enablement sessions internally, just to explain what influencer marketing is and why it's important, and examples of best practices and case studies. So I think we still do run those sessions, and I think internally, that perception and kind of enablement is still important and key across marketing.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point. I mean, it's still quite nascent, even though that both of you have been doing it for a number of years now. And so I think the education is just externally between all stakeholders, and both internally as well, is absolutely critical. I was going to ask you, what have been the key successes, the kind of big wins over the past few years? Maybe Ryan, you could go first.
Yeah, I think there's a few. So we saw a lot, and I know Nada's probably going to talk a lot about what she's done on the local level, but I think when we think earlier this year, a big marquee event, this was the first year we sort of had time. 2020, we were kind of a little bit scrambling to try to make it from a in-person event to a digital event, which a lot of the other places were doing the same thing. And so this year gave us time, knowing it was going to be virtual, to really kind of have a great plan. And it allowed for us to test this exact theory of bringing all these different teams together, and how do we have like a group of influencers helping support that event, and our employee advocates, those SMEs, subject matter experts that have, a really valuable voice in the space, and getting the right people from across the company involved. So I saw a lot of success there in terms of just bringing IBM together for this one event, which most of IBM is all focused on anyway. And it allowed us to see a lot of great success from the global main event there in May. So that was like the most recent sort of, we loved seeing that. And I think it was really great success putting these people together. And I know Nada probably has a lot of other examples on local level too.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think for me as well, just being able to identify influencers that we have turned into IBM advocates. So, even if it's just like a set of key influencers that we've worked with them over the years and are kind of always on campaigns, and the fact that we've managed to turn them into IBM advocates is a huge success for me. And also being able to introduce them to our subject matter experts, and that's one of the things that I've had really positive feedback from our SMEs and from the sales teams. Is that they found it really beneficial, and kind of they really value being introduced to like-minded thought leaders and industry experts. And then I also think the content creation part as well is a huge success. So we've managed to experiment and pilot and create some of our best performing high quality thought leadership content, whether it's a LinkedIn live like this, or a podcast, or a fireside.
Hopefully with a better internet connection.
So we've managed to experiment and I think it's been really great to experiment across different formats and to create content and co-create content with influencers. And then finally, as Ryan said, I also completely support what he said around Think, and for our EMEA Think Summit events as well that took place last month. You can just see the impact from our influencer marketing campaigns, both from an external influencer perspective and our employee advocacy programs, and how about 60% of our client social registrations driven for client and business partner registrations were driven through influencers, both external and internal. So obviously that's huge, and I think that our stakeholders and the marketing teams, really see that and see the role that influencers play and how important they've become as part of the marketing mix now.
Yeah, no, what I love about that is, so you've got the quantitative facts like 60% of social registrations across client and partner driven by influencer content. I think also some of the attendance of the registrations was higher through the influencer channel. I believe, which is interesting because of the quality of audience. I love the fact that you have quantitative stats like that. You've obviously got things like brand share of voice metrics within influencer community. So that's the kind of quantitative part. But I also think that sometimes and I see this a lot in brands which are starting out, they are measuring the performance of a content, the thought leadership better than what they push out through their brand, maybe just many months before. But actually, the fact that both of you have linked it up with your employee advocates and the quality of content is increasing, and there's just a multitude of knock-on effects which I can see have sort of taken on a lot of sort of qualitative benefits, and that is, I think, harder for brands starting out to kind of recognize. But and so almost you've got the quantitative and qualitative sides, and the subject matter experts and the exec leaders that are benefiting from this, I imagine, are kind of bought in, and that helps the internal recognition, I imagine.
Yeah, and to Nada's comment earlier about the influencer council, I think that's another thing that's happening internally, but it brought sort of the brightest minds that are kind of doing influencer work at IBM today together to create playbooks and to create case studies and other resources for the rest of the practitioners to use across IBM, but also just for any IBMer that's interested in what is influencer marketing like at IBM? How are we doing it? Who are we working with? What are the successes? And I think that's also just a really great value we've added to the company, is being able to kind of bring all these minds together, share that internally, and continue to evolve it, right? It doesn't just go away and we turn the light off, it's done. We got to continue to build upon it, because as you guys know, things are new platforms are evolving and things are changing, and new influencers are popping up and others are kind of expanding their reach. So I think it's one thing we continue to look at, but that's been a really great success too, is just being able to put it all together and have a clear point of view.
I love that influencer council. Can I ask how many people are involved in that globally? Is it 10 people or 50, or is it
much smaller? Yeah. So I think it was we kind of divided it into couple different streams, right? There was an employee advocacy sort of work stream, which I think had a handful of individuals, and then there was sort of the external influence point of view, and we met weekly, had sprints and sort of agile fashion, and so I would say probably about 10 people total across the different work streams were involved in that council. to sort of evolve as I mentioned, like the marketing organizations, changing right now at IBM. And so we're kind of evolving and fitting into the new model and making sure we're relevant in the market with influencers.
Fantastic. And I'd love to dig into the connection between employee advocacy and influence marketing, because you've obviously got a lot of great wins there. And how many people, how many employee advocates are sort of part of the program, and how many people sort of connect to the influencers? How do you manage that? Because obviously there's, tens of thousands of employees, lots of subject matter experts internally. How do you select the employee advocates? How do you connect them up? Like, I'd love to know a bit of detail about that.
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, and kind of from the programs and campaigns that I've managed, obviously it depends on like the campaign and the objective, and whether it's a specific event that we're managing and wanting to involve external influencers in. So that's a kind of example of how we involved influencers for Think, for example, and managed to get influencers to take part in the agenda itself and to speak and to moderate some sessions and to take part as panelists, but also, got them to also run co-created content with our SMEs as well. So pre-event, to do like a bit of a kind of sneak preview in terms of some of the sessions that will take place. And so one of our influencers, for example, interviewed 3 of our SMEs on what they'll be speaking about in their event and in the session. So there's various ways that we kind of co-create content, especially around events. From an always-on perspective as well, I think one of the key benefits from kind of tying the external influencers with internal influencers is just simply introducing them to like-minded individuals based on their topics of interest. So if our SMEs are interested in AI or hypercloud, then we'd identify relevant influencers in kind of those industries and those segments to connect them with, to introduce them to each other, to facilitate those conversations for them to build a kind of a long-term authentic relationship. So it really depends on the campaign, but I think that's one of the main benefits, and to a simple way to just connect our internal influencers with external influencers. And then the other point is around co-creation of content as well. So we've got some examples of great blogs that were co-created, so longer form pieces of content around fireside chats and LinkedIn live sessions and podcasts. So just different formats, different influencers. Just it all goes back to what your objective is with your campaign and what you're trying to achieve.
No, that sounds amazing. And through the campaigns, you've obviously got some wonderful connections. Do you see, Ryan, that once that's happened, that there's like an ongoing relationship, that there's lots of content produced through SMEs and influencers naturally, just as part of a social engagement? Or do you think that really relies upon the brand to just continue investing in employee-generated content and influencer-generated content?
It's a good question. I think that I look at our kind of advocacy in a couple different tiers. There's your tier of individuals that are happy to share IBM content. They do it on their personal channels, and it's kind of low touch for them. And then it's up to the higher tier where we kind of have like a more white glove service of our SMEs that are creating content in collaboration sometimes with influencers to, help tell the story to their audience and maybe get their unique point of view on something, and not be sort of heavily driven by IBM. So I think I will be honest and say there is a lot of encouragement from the marketing team to make sure that our SMEs are active in creating sort of longer form pieces of content in collaboration with influencers. I don't think it's happening a ton organically. Now, I do think that once there's that connection made and they've been able to either speak on a panel or have a private interview or conversation around a topic or campaign, that there is a lot of the two-way engagement on social happening, whether that's through liking, commenting, sharing posts, whether on LinkedIn or Twitter or other places. But when it comes to sort of like video creation, I have seen that sort of organically happen over time. And there's an example where we had a launch event a few years ago and several influencers there to help us tell that story on social and from their point of view. And post that event, there was several kind of conversations around what's happening next and the next event that influencer might be at. So we got to make sure that we all have a view into what's happening, because we want to make sure that we're getting the right performance metrics if we need them, if possible, because we're in marketing, we have to kind of move that needle. But I do think that it kind of varies a little bit on the comfort level of the SME, but on social happens a lot. I think if it's a little bit more of our guidance that's needed when we get to longer form pieces of content, whether it's like videos or blogs or podcasts.
Amazing. I think that probably was quite satisfying, seeing the ongoing conversations as well. I know that there's a lot of execs and subject matter experts that have developed their social media expertise and influence and actually taken to it when they might not have been as comfortable beforehand. So I imagine that makes you feel good when you're running the programs to
We
just see
absolutely love
see the
that.
personal growth.
Yeah, if an IBMer who we think has a really unique story to tell, or has an expert on a certain subject, and they are kind of hesitant to get on social because maybe it's not their day job, right? Or it's, we're adding extra stuff to their plate, already busy, full plate. But when they can kind of see that happening organically, and we're kind of listening. We're not necessarily like always going in and making sure they're doing those things, but as we pay attention, we follow the influences on our personal channels, and we can kind of see engagement just naturally happen. We love that. I think that's a win if we can build those connections, because when I talk to our influencers or any person we're working with externally, like, what's something you want to get out of working with IBM in this like sort of capacity by creating and collaborating on content? It's a lot of times it's connections with SMEs. They want to be able, we don't have events right now, or, we're working towards those face-to-face events, but a lot of times they want to just have a chat or a coffee or whatever it can be with an SME. And it doesn't always have to be this big, grand, celebration with a payment or other things. It can just be a quick conversation. So I think we'd love to see that. At least I do.
Yeah, and I guess they want customer case studies. They want materials for their books. They need content to inspire them. So I guess that's all. That's sometimes when influencers don't go through marketing, they just have a conversation with another person. There's never a payment involved, is there? There's just a conversation, which is great. I'd love to ask Nada how you think influencer marketing, employee advocacy is evolving. When you look at the next, I suppose we're coming up to towards the end of the year, even though I still think it's summer, but it's a bit cold in the UK, so that's definitely telling me it's not. When you're looking forward to 2022, do you think like same as before, just a bit more scale, or like what trends or changes do you think are important?
Yeah. So I think data-driven influencer marketing will kind of be a big focus. So I think the more money that brands kind of invest into influencer marketing, the more important the return on investment becomes. And I think data is really important for a number of different reasons. So obviously it helps us identify the most relevant influencers that we want to connect with and build relationships with, but also it helps us kind of measure and optimize our campaigns as we go along and kind of iterate. So I think as brands and organizations invest more in influencer marketing, I think it will move from just being kind of experimental to being a core part of our marketing mix. And I think it's really important that we then also make sure we dedicate the resource and the time and effort into managing those programs.
Great. Ryan, I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, like retweet all of that. I think a lot of companies, at least in the B2B space, have been able to kind of say, oh, I'm going to test this out. I'm going to try it out. We'll see if it works. But now I think the evolution of these programs and influencer marketing is we need to know what we need to know, right? We need to have metrics. We need to work closer with the influencer to see the performance of the things that we're doing on social and the campaigns we're running with them. And I also, part of that is like audience analysis. I think that's a really big part that we haven't had haven't had always the best insight into, like who in their audience are they engaging most with? And are those people also individuals we want to engage with from an IBM perspective or a business perspective? I think that's really important as we continue to grow that. And then finally, last thought, I think it's the connection we were just talking about with employees. I think employee advocacy is continue to evolve and be refined. I think it's pretty something in a platform and have a bunch of people share it from their channels. But I think where it's going to evolve to is, how do you have a heavier touch with smaller group of people, and build a year-long or annual campaign with that individual, and you tie in not only the business objectives, talking about our offerings, but then you have cultural moments, and you have other things that are really important locally that give a human perspective to that point of view for that. I think that as a marketing team, we can kind of think, okay, through the whole year, through this period of time, what's the story you're going to tell? How does it all weave together? How do we obviously make sure IBM is represented well, but you as a person and your social persona is also growing. We want to put effort and resources into you because we think that you have a fresh face, a fresh voice, something to say in the market. And I think that's going to continue to evolve and grow in the coming months and years.
I love those two. I just had like 50 questions in my head from what both of you have said, because it's exciting. And I guess that when you're looking at investment, I think 70% of marketers have surveyed were building in influence marketing into their budgets. And if you look at all the different surveys, people say they're going to invest more next year than they have previously, or that's what they said at the end of 2020. Obviously, when the pandemic was like really at sort of the height of its peak. So I guess what I kind of start thinking is when you're a CMO, or when you're like you're giving out the dollars, is this diverting budgets from maybe content creation and putting it towards employee generated content and influence generated content? Or is this just influencer marketing showing the return better to just get more investment by itself? Or is it like is less being spent on advertising and paid media, or is this just an add-on? I guess I'd love for you to share your thoughts on whether they're kind of interlinked, or whether influencer marketing just needs to do a better job of showing the value and just getting that business case.
Yeah. So I think I read in an article in the Drum that influencer marketing, I think in 2020 was worth 9.7 billion and is expected to grow to $15 billion by 2022. So I think you're absolutely right. And with almost half of marketers saying they're spending more than 20% of their budget on influencer content. So it's interesting because that says influencer content. And I think working with influencers now, and I think because I attended Social Media Week this week as well, and there was a lot of conversations around creators, and I was even asking the difference between the difference between a creator and an influencer, and I think a lot of people said it's like the next iteration of influencer marketing, and I think that makes sense. Working with influencers, they're content creators, and I think that's a big part of what you invest in as well. You're investing into working with people who are credible, who can help us, change our perception of what we want to be known for, can help us reach new audiences. But also, I think more importantly, they can help us create high quality content. And it's that content creation that, we're wanting to focus more on. So I think in terms of budget, I'm not sure if we'd move budget away from other areas necessarily. I think it's just being, investing a big part of our marketing budget into influencer marketing, which is definitely something that's needed. And now that that we're able to track real impact from our campaigns, I think we'll encourage brands and marketers to invest more of their budget in influencer marketing campaigns, because we're able to track the full journey and we know it impacts the whole entire funnel. So if your objective is awareness, then you're going to be able to track reach and engagements and those kind of metrics. And then if it's lower funnel, then you're able to track engaged visits to your landing pages or blogs, or that conversion, whatever that conversion is for the brand.
Yeah, I look at it like we want to fund the creativity of these influencers, and so that might mean taking a little bit of money from maybe an agency resource and putting it into influencers. And to Nada's point, we want to fund their creativity. We want to make sure they're creating engaging and interesting content, not only for their audiences, but the audiences that we want to hopefully attract to IBM and build relevance for the topics that we want to be relevant for. So I think that's really And as we know, like organic social just continues to have limitations on its reach. So I think paid socials can continue to be very important. And I think you can look at influencers in a similar way of how do we target their audiences that are relevant to IBM and get them to our website, get them to it within a campaign, and hopefully, get them into the journey. So I think budget can come from different ways. It kind of depends on how you look at it. But I think of it as like they're almost at their own agency or their own sort of vendor where they can go and create the thing, and a lot of times can do it very quickly and can do it very for good cost. And we can do that, and it's no different than working with maybe a larger agency or other vendor, which can obviously take a little bit longer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I love the point about organic social being declined. So there has to be that hybrid mix of paid social as well as the quality content, and I think that there's a couple of things that brands struggle with. One, I talked to a lot of brands that internally have to explain why influencers are paid, and a lot of people internally struggle with that and say, but we don't want that. That's not our culture, and they have to explain why, and like they're paying because they're independent, and then they say, well, who are they? They're independent consultant. That doesn't sound very good. And so obviously, even though we might know that they're great influential experts with the right audiences, there's a big explanatory conversation around that. And the other point is that if they're creating quality content, then that by itself is not going to drive leads or drive awareness. So there's the whole sort of repurposing, the content repurposing part. So I'd love to understand one, your view on how to explain why influencers are paid, and two, once you get the quality content, how you think brands should repurpose it to get the best kind of performance metrics that you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think so. I think we've had that conversation internally as well, and that comes up as a question a lot actually when we ran sessions in marketing earlier this year. So I usually say it can actually be a cost-effective way to to engage influencers because not only we're obviously kind of tapping into their reach and authority, but also they're content creators as well. And now I think also, and this is probably, the pandemic has helped accelerate this in the last 18 months. I think external influencers are getting really good at creating professional, high quality content, and they've got the kits for filming and everything else. And I think Ryan mentioned this earlier as well, is like instead of kind of trying to pay maybe an agency to help ghostwrite a blog for us, then it makes more sense to invest that budget into an influencer who is a real subject matter expert in the topic, and also they're super professional and really good natural in front of the camera, and obviously used to moderating sessions and being speaking at events. And yeah, you mentioned different personas, so I think that's what I'd usually say. It depends on the campaign, your objective, why you're paying the influencer, and what you're paying them to do. And typically when we do pay them, it is to either speak at events or to help create thought leadership content.
I mean, I think it's simple for me. It's like we're paying this individual for their time, and we've selected them because of XYZ reasons, and we wouldn't go to an agency and ask them to produce content with us or collaborate on something and not expect to pay them. Now, not every influencer is expecting payment, and not every team has maybe the budget for influencers. So we have to get sometimes a little creative in other benefits that we can provide. Again, maybe that's a one-on-one with an SME. Maybe that is attending an event. As other, there's other ways that we can kind of get people involved, and it's not always maybe a check. And I know Tim and you guys have done a lot of research on sometimes payment isn't the number one thing influencers want. They want to be amplified by the brand and be recognized as credible coming, if we're collaborating with IBM, that hopefully gives them some credibility to their network. And I
Absolutely.
To your second question around repurposing content, I love that, right? That is, we want to make sure content has as much legs as we can get on it. And if that means that could look like our our branded channels could be sharing and creating snippets of content of like audiograms or other things on their channels. If we're going to events and they're capturing things live in the moment, can we then put that on a web page or put that into our sales kits for our sellers to go and leverage and say, so and so was at this event, they're influential in this space, they had this conversation with our XYZ client, and we think this will be relevant for you because you're having the same challenges or digital transformation in your company. And so we definitely want to make sure our sales organization is being fed a lot of this content, and we can make it snackable for them when they have to go out and kind of like make those calls or emails or other touch points.
Yeah, I think that's so good to hear, because sometimes if you're scrolling through LinkedIn and you see, IBM doing some great work with an influencer, and you see that, he's getting thousands of views or something like that, then you think, great, that's good quality content. It's been seen by the right type of audience. But actually, that's just the tip of the iceberg, as you're saying, because if you're including it in sales decks, I know that you include it, I think, in an influencer newsletter internally, so that there's some, I imagine, educational, insights that people get, through that couldn't attend the event. There's also, you're talking about maybe audiograms on your brand channel, and blogs, and the potentially sharing on an employee advocacy tool as well. And I just love that that the reach of this content, could be like a half an hour conversation or 10-minute panel or an hour fireside chat, can do across the brand. So it's amazing to hear that. I mean, Nada, when you create some really cool content with the influencers, do you feel like the French influencer would obviously just be repurposed in France, or do you feel like there's EMEA influencers talking English that can be repurposed across your 9 markets? Like, how does that work? It's more complex in Europe, isn't it?
I think so, because we do have influencers, obviously, kind of speaking the local language that we have engaged. So I think the language is one thing, but I think also what we need to look at is the influence. Some external influencers have a large following across different countries. So we worked with one influencer that actually said, even though I'm based in Italy, actually a big part of my followers are in the US and in the UK. And he had like different handles as well. So I had like an Italian handle where he'd speak to his audience in Italian, and then he'd have kind of English speaking handles as well, and accounts. So that was really interesting. So I think we definitely need that next level of understanding the influencers we're working with, and kind of like their followers and their audiences, and who they are, and therefore create relevant content based on that audience. So that's what I think, co-creating the brief is really important as well, to really hear from the influencers, whether how we can incentivize them, what's important to them. And I love the research report that you guys did, where you interviewed over 300 influencers and the feedback you got from them. And I think brands really need to listen to what influencers want, and how they want to engage with brands, and what challenges they face as well. So co-creating the brief, I think, is a really important one for me. And we shouldn't be kind of dictating what content we want to create, but more of a conversation around what works for the influencer. They often know their audiences best and what resonates, and then being able to like repurpose that content, absolutely, if it makes sense and can be reused. A lot of times what we talk about in terms of thought leadership is relevant across all the markets, really. So if it's in English, then obviously, yeah, absolutely, it can be repurposed. If it's in a specific language, then we just need to make sure it kind of doesn't put off that specific audience that we're sharing, on that channel.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And both of you are talking about audience analysis, and obviously that's the key part of things going forward. I just want to read out a comment. So Dan Mallinson, oh, hi Dan. On the budget point, we moved away from a recent history of begging, borrowing, and stealing budget from marketing, advertising, comms, performance, to those projects now getting the investment and recognition up front. And he's being very complimentary about both of you. So thanks, Dan, for listening. So yeah, I would love to to understand what advice you would give to people who are maybe not as advanced as IBM or some of the tech brands that have been doing this for maybe like 5 to 7 years. So if you're starting out and thinking about like when you started your journey and all the knowledge that you got now, what would you advise them?
Yeah, I'll start. And thanks, Dan, for the comments. I haven't seen them yet, but thank you for that. What I learned from where I started to where we are today, and we continue to evolve, right? We have not figured this out, and we can like try new things and test and new platforms. But when I got started, and I think starting really early with Analytico, it's like I want to have, 50 influencers in my program, and I want to have 2 million reach on Twitter. And I don't know why that was a thing. That was just the number I wanted in my head, right? And that was like a big number, like it was going to get everyone interested in internally. Like, team was going to be like, yeah, that's great. We can reach this. And as things got going, and I realized like that's not how I should be rating at all, right? Like it's not about the reach, and it's not about the number of people you have in your program. It's about the performance and engagement, right? And the relationships you're building. And this takes time to build relationships. And not to mention at the top was like one thing she's proud of is like seeing the relationships that she's been building with influencers over the years, and how that's evolved into maybe organic things happening on social that we're not necessarily always like kind of facilitating. So I think I would my word of advice for individuals maybe getting started in this space is to start small, is to really understand the topics you want to be known for, and like do a couple topics. We're not trying to like, and IBM was easy to be like, oh, we got to boil the ocean, right? We got to do all these things. We want to make sure we're talking about all these things. Figure out the 1 or 2 things you want to like be known for and kind of own in those topics, and just dive into that, whether that's through your own manual research on social by just putting in hashtags and following the right people and creating lists on Twitter, to then evolving over time. And once you get them in your program and start building relationships and doing the 1 or 2 things off, I think then it can kind of organically build and grow. And your metrics shouldn't be about like the number of people and the reach on Twitter, because that's ultimately not that important. It's about what are the things they're putting out there, and are those getting engaged by the right people? And is that then in turn creating content and opening the door for our sales team or offering teams to learn more about like how can we improve our offerings? I think that it just opens up a lot of doors when you kind of have a small group and you sort of build from there.
Fantastic. Thanks. What do you think, Nada?
Yeah, I completely agree. Honestly, I wrote the same thing in terms of tip. I said,
I should have asked you first. That Ryan would have to have done more work.
We're completely aligned and completely agree. So I think, start small and then scale. And I think the benefit with that as well is that you're able to then more quickly show the impact and the results. And, you're able to then take that and share the results with your stakeholders and business units and senior leadership team to get their buy-in. So I think that's another benefit for why you should also start small and then, show the impact and then scale. And then I think just to add from an employee advocacy perspective, I'd just say, it's really important you focus on committed, employees that, whether they're execs or your subject matter experts that see the value in social and are kind of committed to wanting to build their visibility and kind of see the benefits there, rather than, again, trying to just, what we used to do is like run loads of enablement sessions and then hope that, it resonates with people and they'll go off and get social, not really being able to like track the ROI from that. So I think we need to be more strategic in what we do and who we work with, and involve them in our campaigns, so they're part of our marketing mix and marketing strategy, rather than sometimes employee advocacy seems like an add-on, or like, we'll focus on our editorial calendars and then, we'll worry about the employees later. And actually, I think they need to be integrated into what we do. And, that we know the answer isn't always content going out from our branded channels. So, that's where we really need to, involve them, and kind of they need to be a consideration and integrated right from the start. So they're a key part of our marketing strategy, and it's a bit more strategic and targeted.
Yeah, no, I love those 2 points. And I guess when people don't have buy-in for influence marketing but want to start, they want to show the big numbers, probably like when you started, Ryan. You're like, okay, there's going to be 2 million because I want to get people's attention, because a big number gets people's attention. I guess what we're saying is start smaller, but connect with the different campaigns and try to bring this in earlier and try to do some maybe internal lobbying, or just like just discovery in terms of what their outcomes really are, and then start with a couple of influencers and create some really high quality content and try and move the performance based metrics and then go from there. But not trying to do too much at the beginning, which I think a lot of brands struggle with. But then I always say to people, maybe take an underperforming area, or somewhere where it's big enough focus for the business, where there could be a bit of innovation or pilot budget around. But I think what you did, Ryan, is what everyone is still doing, because eyeballs and big numbers, and I'm going to drive 1,000 leads with a couple of influencers, is kind of how you can get budget over the line. But as you've proved, there's just so much benefits beyond some of the quantitative measures, that it's almost like a social transformation and change of mindset. So I still think it's a very interesting challenge in the marketplace. But anyone listening, I think those are two really, really good pieces of advice. I must just ask you about the channel. You're talking about audience analysis. I know, Ryan, that that you are an avid TikToker. I'm probably I'm probably just throwing you under the bus there. I did see one TikTok fun video that you did. Do you think that, apart from LinkedIn and Twitter, do you think that there are other channels now becoming much more prominent for B2B?
Yes. I think Twitter, we know, is kind of a great place to start. It's like the most open of the platforms, and it gives us a good understanding of individuals. And then LinkedIn for B2B is really still important. We know a lot of engagement happens there on that platform, and a lot of our IBMers are already on that platform, and it's easy for us to sort of make those connections with influencers, and a lot of business people are going there to like learn more. So, but sort of a non-traditional platform, I think I haven't seen TikTok yet blow up in the B2B space, but it is something that we are at IBM exploring more of, and understanding who are the creators on that platform that are talking about cloud or AI or data, and can we do some really interesting things with them. Obviously, YouTube is a really important platform too. There's a lot of great content, and people obviously are on the platform a lot of time during the day to learn. And I think that's a really great place for us to identify and spend more time with our influencers. And then finally, I would say Reddit is a great place that we can engage. It's a little bit harder because anonymous, and you don't really know exactly who you're communicating with. But I think there's a lot of conversation happening there, and at the very least, we should be listening to what's happening on Reddit, and that can inform a lot of our strategy, or content or ideas, how we want to leverage how people are talking about technology today in those communities and subreddits, and how do we take that to maybe other platforms, and it can inform a lot of our strategy. So I think that's another platform we should be at least listening to if we're not going to participate with influencers or IBMers.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think what I love about social as well is being able to experiment, and being able, like, all these things evolve so quickly. And TikTok is, what was it, the most downloaded app in 2020, and I think, is it still going to be here in, I don't know, 10 years? Who knows? But I think it's important that you pilot things, and you experiment and test things, and innovate. And I think we've really got that opportunity in social. So yeah, completely agree with Ryan.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, a bit harder to do audience analysis on Reddit, but I think that's a great point about the listening channel. Steve, it's a great conversation. I appreciate these leaders and their willingness to speak about these issues. I love the approach of showing the impact and then achieving scale. So thank you so much for joining. It's been amazing to speak to both of you. Again, apologies for introducing you both and then my internet connection totally dropping. I did that on purpose just to give you a good test, because I know that you're ready for anything. But thank you so much. And anyone that wants to watch any more kind of social advocacy interviews or customer chats, then go to the Analytica resources page on our website. thank you to Ryan and Nada, two excellent practitioners in the influence marketing employee advocacy space. So go and connect with them, follow them, and I'm sure they'll engage with you on social and share ongoing knowledge. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Tim. Nice to talk with you, Nada, too.
You too.
Okay.